One can say that there is a little bit of that social distancing, but certainly very difficult to do so in the midst of that parliamentary house at present then. So we're still awaiting just when the president will begin to speak to us. The growth picture, as I said a little bit earlier on, for South Africa continues to be dire. And perhaps this is the right time to even speak about South Africa's unemployment saga and the figures there. Yes, we saw that figure go calamitously down to around 23.3% odd, and that was a complete uproar. All I'll say is this: let's first understand what has happened when it comes to those figures. Let's not just assume that the actual unemployment rate has gone down. The 42% unemployment rate, when it comes to those that have also given up looking, so the expanded definition of unemployment, that's perhaps the one you want to really look at, because that determines how many people within South Africa's labor force could actually get a job. And they probably all could. But the problem is, we don't necessarily have all the opportunities. Perhaps there's also a skills mismatch. But at 42%, I can tell you now that the mismatch cannot account for all of those numbers. So the question becomes, what industries are we growing? We've spoken about construction so often. It's 10 years since the FIFA World Cup was in South Africa, when the last major infrastructure build actually happened in the country. So where to from here? That is the big question. Let's head on over now to Parliament, and hopefully we'll get proceedings underway then. President Cyril Ramaphosa expected to give us government's economic reconstruction and recovery plan. We'll be back with you right after this.
Thank you. May I also ask you to remain standing for a moment of silent prayer for those who have departed within the whole of South Africa since COVID-19. Thank you. Please take your seats. Honorable members, the President has called for this joint sitting of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces in terms of Section 84(2)(d) of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, read with Joint Rule 7(1)(b) in order to outline South Africa's economic reconstruction and recovery plan. I now wish to call the President to the podium. Mr. President.
Speaker of the National Assembly, Ms. Thandi Modise, the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Mr. Amos Masondo, Deputy President David Dabe de Mabuza, Ministers, Deputy Ministers, Honorable Members of the National Assembly, and the NCOP, members who are here in the House, and those who are participating online, and fellow South Africans. I've requested this sitting of the Joint Houses of Parliament to present the plan for the reconstruction and recovery of our economy and our country. In contrast to the State of the Nation address, where we usually address the broad program of government for the year, today I want to focus on the extraordinary measures that we must take to restore our economy to inclusive growth following the devastation caused by COVID-19 to our people's lives and to our country's economy. This is a plan through which all of us as South Africans should work together to build the economy of our country into an inclusive economy and also in a new economy. The objectives of the plan are clear. Firstly, it is to create jobs primarily through aggressive infrastructure investment and mass employment programs. Secondly, to re-industrialize our economy, focusing on small businesses, growing them, and strengthening medium and large businesses. Thirdly, it is to accelerate economic reforms.
Thank you, Elder.
Investment and growth. Fourthly, to fight crime and corruption. And fifthly, to improve the capability of the state. All these objectives are linked to the vision of our country set out in the National Development Plan. Madam Speaker, Chairperson of the NCOP, on this day 7 months ago, we declared a national state of disaster to confront the greatest health emergency that the world has known in more than a century. Since then, the coronavirus has infected more than 38 million people across the world and has been responsible for the deaths of more than 1 million people. The reality that we must confront is that the pandemic will not be over soon. Globally, the number of COVID cases per day is currently at its highest level since the start of the pandemic. This has far-reaching implications in every area of human development, from education, health, from food security, poverty alleviation, from the empowerment of women to social stability. The pandemic continues to cause severe damage to the global economy, affecting trade, investment, production, international travel, and global supply and demand. No country, not even ours, has been spared. No economy has been left unaffected. This is also the case on our own continent, rather. In South Africa, the pandemic has caused great hardship and suffering. In the 220 days since our first recorded case, more than 18,000 people have been confirmed to have died from COVID-19. The loss of these lives is not only devastating to the families who have lost their loved ones, but also to our nation. South Africa has over 700,000 confirmed cases. At present, 90% of those infected have recovered. As a result of the measures that we took to delay the transmission and to prepare our health facilities, we were able to withstand the massive surge of infections in the middle of July. At that time, new cases were being detected at an average of 500 an hour. That was particularly a dark time in the life of our country. While the national lockdown in April had a significant impact on economic activity, the economic consequences of an uncontrolled surge would have been far worse. Due to the dedication and sacrifices of millions of South Africans, we were able in many ways to limit the impact of the pandemic on the lives and the livelihoods of our people. For the last month and a half, even as we have significantly eased the restrictions that were imposed on movement and social and economic activity, the average number of daily cases has remained relatively stable at less than 2,000 cases. But it is far too soon to declare a victory over this virus. The World Health Organization warns that many countries have had a significant resurgence of infections following 4 to 8 weeks of low transmission. The World Health Organization has also advised South Africa that now we're entering a phase that requires high vigilance and heightened readiness to respond. Rather than easing our prevention efforts, including social distancing and observing health protocols, we must intensify all these measures further to reduce new cases to less than 1,000 a day. This virus, coronavirus, will remain part of our lives for some time to come, and therefore we need to adjust to this new reality and also to this new normal in all areas of our lives. Our health system must remain adequately staffed, equipped and financed to ensure that we continue to save lives. We must rebuild, we must repair and restore our country, not after COVID, but right now, in the midst of COVID. Our country had immense challenges for a number of years before the coronavirus hit us. The pandemic has worsened the many challenges that we were facing as a nation and as a people. Poverty and inequality have continued to deepen, threatening many South Africans with hunger and a sudden loss of income. Our economy, like other economies, has contracted sharply. Many businesses have closed and many jobs have been lost. Notwithstanding these challenges, we were duty-bound to respond as a government and as a nation to this pandemic in a way that demonstrated our care for the lives and livelihoods of South Africans. Our response to the pandemic was therefore swift and has, in a number of ways, been three-pronged. Firstly, a robust health response. Secondly, a social and economic relief. And now, an economic recovery. As we anticipated, the impact of the pandemic on the livelihoods of our people, we responded by implementing a massive social and economic relief package to support companies, to support workers, households, and individuals in stress. We announced a relief package which, with a total value of 500 billion rand, or around 10% of our gross domestic product, is the biggest on the African continent and compares favorably with other countries in, say, the G20. Relative to the size of our economy, our social and economic relief response to COVID-19 is roughly on par with countries like Canada, Spain, the United States, as well as Australia. Through the special COVID-19 grants and the top-up of existing grants, which are close to 40 billion, in additional support, this has been provided directly to more than 17 million South Africans from poor households. Studies have shown that these grants were vital in reducing the impact of the pandemic on levels of poverty and hunger. The evidence that has come to light suggests that the expansion of social protection has kept more than 5 million people above the food poverty line during the past 6 months. The special COVID-19 grant in particular represents a significant achievement, reaching more than 6 million unemployed people in a short space of time. More than 960,000 companies have benefited through the UIF wage support scheme and through the grants and loans provided by various government departments and public entities. More than 4 million workers have received 49 billion rand in wage support, helping to protect these jobs even while companies were not able to operate. In addition to those businesses that have received direct support, many more companies have benefited from tax relief measures worth in the region of about 40 billion. The South African Reserve Bank acted swiftly to support the economy and to protect our country's financial system by reducing interest rates to their lowest level in more than 50 years. With a view to protecting jobs and saving companies that employ our people from bankruptcy, we introduced another important intervention in the form of the 200 billion loan guarantee scheme. This scheme has thus far provided 16 billion rand in low interest rates loan to almost 12,000 businesses. Banks have together provided an additional 34 billion in debt relief to individuals as well as businesses. Nonetheless, as far as I'm concerned, this is far short of what is needed and what is possible and what should be done. We are therefore working with the banks to ensure that more companies are able to access this assistance as they resume their operations and that the full potential of this scheme can be realized. I had a conversation with the leaders of the various banks in our country, and I expressed this view very strongly to them that we do need to review how this scheme is being taken up by various companies. And I expressed to them that they should not be setting up barriers for companies not to be able to get this scheme. We must make the scheme simple. Yes, there should be all the due diligences that are observed, but it is these companies that employ our people, and we would like them to continue funding them so that they can continue employing people and even more people. I am certain that the banks will come back with a refined scheme working together with Treasury. The combined effort of the measures taken by government and its social partners has been to preserve our country's economic capacity and lay the foundation for a more rapid recovery. Now, despite these vital interventions, however, the damage caused by the pandemic to an already weak economy, to employment, to livelihoods, to public finances, and to state-owned enterprises has been colossal. More than 2 million people lost their jobs in the second quarter of this year. Our economy contracted by 16.4% when compared to the previous quarter. National Treasury expects a significant shortfall in revenue collection. This economic shock is unprecedented in our country, and it will take an extraordinary effort to recover from it. As even the darkest of clouds has a silver lining, we need to see this moment as a rupture with the past and also an opportunity to drive fundamental and lasting change. It is an opportunity not only to recover the ground that we have lost over the course of the pandemic, but to place the economy on a path of growth. We are therefore presenting before this joint sitting of Parliament and the country a reconstruction and recovery plan to drive growth that is inclusive, but growth that is also transformative. The South African Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan builds on the common ground established by the social partners, being government, labor, business, and community organizations. And this has been done through intensive and detailed consultations over the last few months. It is informed by the work of Cabinet's economic cluster, working with government departments and Cabinet itself, and draws on the contributions of the leading economists who make up the Presidential Economic Advisory Group. From government side, leading the economic cluster, I'd like to thank Minister Kensani Kubai-Ngubane and Minister Gwede Mantashe, who have steered our work in reaching to this point. I do wish to applaud the remarkable efforts, particularly from our social partners in NEDLEC, in reaching consensus on the actions that are required to rebuild our economy and the firm actions that all social partners have committed to contribute to the country's recovery. We know from the examples of several other countries that social compacts are essential to effective and sustainable growth and development. As we implement this plan, government remains committed to the agreements that were reached through the NEDLEC process. Honorable members, the work that we have embarked upon to rebuild our economy after the devastation of coronavirus is in the end guided by the vision 2030 of the National Development Plan and the program that was outlined at the beginning of the 6th Democratic Administration, where we set out key priorities to drive change and transformation in our country. The depth of the crisis caused by the pandemic has indeed sharpened our focus and our determination to address the challenges that face us. The creation of jobs is at the center of the Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. We must get our people back to work, back into their jobs, the jobs that were lost during the pandemic. We are determined to create more employment opportunities for those who were unemployed before the pandemic or who had given up looking for work. This means unleashing the potential of our economy by, amongst others, implementing necessary reforms, removing regulatory barriers that increase costs and create inefficiencies in the economy, securing our energy supply, and freeing up digital infrastructure. This plan directly responds to the immediate economic impact of COVID-19 by driving job creation and expanding support for vulnerable households. We aim to do this primarily through a major infrastructure program and a large-scale employment stimulus, coupled with an intensive localization drive and industrial expansion. The interventions outlined in this plan will, 1, achieve efficient, secure, and reliable energy supply within 2 years. They will also create and support over 800,000 work opportunities in the immediate term to respond to job losses. They will also unlock more than 1 trillion rand in infrastructure investment over the next 4 years. They will also reduce data costs for every South African and expand broadband access to low-income households. But they will also reverse the decline of local manufacturing sector and promote re-industrialization through deeper levels of localization and exports. But they will also resuscitate vulnerable sectors, such as tourism, which have been hard hit by the pandemic. Now, according to the modeling done by the National Treasury, the implementation of this plan will contribute an additional 1.7% to the baseline of 1.3% economic growth, bringing average growth over the next 10 years to about 3% per annum. Our recovery will be propelled by swift reforms to unleash the potential of the economy and supported by an efficient state that is committed to clean governance. This will be transformative. This will be inclusive. It will be digital, green, sustainable, and it will invest our human capital to lay the foundation for the future. The economic reconstruction and recovery recognizes that to support a rapid economic rebound, South Africa needs to focus on a few high-impact interventions to ensure that they are executed swiftly and effectively. When we looked very closely at what needed to be done, we realized that we could have had up to 54 areas of interventions. But we decided that we needed a few where there would be swift implementation, where we would be able to see sustained progress. And that is the route that we have chosen. The reconstruction plan has 4 priority interventions. Firstly, we are embarking on a massive rollout of infrastructure throughout the country. Infrastructure has immense potential to stimulate investment and growth, to develop other economic sectors, and to create sustained employment, both directly and indirectly. We have developed a robust pipeline of projects that will completely transform the landscape of our cities, of our towns, and indeed of our rural areas. By the end of June 2020, we had 276 catalytic projects with an investment value of 2.3 trillion rand. Moreover, a list of 50 strategic integrated projects and 12 special projects was gazetted in July 2020. These catalytic projects have been prioritized for immediate implementation with all regulatory processes fast-tracked, enabling over 340 billion rand in investment. These projects are at various stages of the project life cycle. Those that are already in construction will see the future phases brought earlier for implementation, including some human settlements projects which have already received bulk financing to unlock them. We are exploring the use of credit-enhancing instruments to unlock bulk water infrastructure and national roads improvement projects. Our infrastructure build program will focus on social infrastructure such as schools, water, sanitation, and housing for the benefit of our people. We will focus on critical network infrastructure, such as our ports, our roads and rail, that are key to our economy's competitiveness. We have taken steps to remove the constraints that have over time hampered infrastructure delivery over a number of years. To ensure that there is active implementation of our infrastructure build program, we have established what we call Infrastructure South Africa and the Infrastructure Fund, with the capacity to prepare and package programs. And this is precisely what they are already doing. This approach is already encouraging the private sector investors to help us build capability for infrastructure delivery within the state and to develop blended financing models. The Infrastructure Fund will provide 100 billion rand in catalytic finance over the next decade, leveraging as much as 1 trillion rand in new investment for strategic infrastructure projects. Several projects have already started and they are already in construction. These include human settlements projects such as Matlosana N2 in Northwest, Lufureng in Gauteng, Greater Konobia in KZN, and Vista Park in the Free State. Together, these represent an investment value of 44.5 billion rand. In total, we have gazetted 18 housing projects to the value of 130 billion, which together will produce more than 190,000 housing units. Transport projects currently under construction include the N1 Polokwane and the N1 Musina, with a total value of 1.3 billion. Within the next 6 months, we will embark on the modernization and refurbishment of the commuter rail network, include the Mabopane line in Tshwane and the Central line in Cape Town. We'll expand the National Rural and Municipal Road Rehabilitation and Maintenance Program using local, labor-intensive methods. We will also fast-track the implementation of gazetted strategic infrastructure projects through the approval of credit-enhancing instruments, the provision of bulk infrastructure, and the speedy processing of water use licenses, environmental impact assessments, and township establishments. And we will also adapt the infrastructure procurement framework to enable public-private partnerships and unlock new funding. Our second priority intervention is to rapidly expand energy generation capacity. We are accelerating the implementation of the integrated resource plan to provide a substantial increase in the contribution of renewable energy sources, battery storage, and gas technology. This should bring around 11,800 megawatts of new generation capacity into the system by 2022. More than half of this energy will be generated from renewable sources. In the immediate term, agreements will be finalized with independent power producers to connect over 2,000 megawatts of additional capacity from existing projects by June 2021. The risk mitigation power procurement program will unlock a further 2,000 megawatts of emergency supply within 12 months. The process to implement bid window 5 of the renewable energy program has already begun. We are taking further steps to enable power generation for own use. The current regulatory framework will be adopted to facilitate new generation projects while protecting the integrity of the national grid. Application for own use generation projects are being urgently fast-tracked. The work of restructuring ESCOM into the 3 separate entities for generation, transmission, and distribution is continuing, and this will enhance competition and ensure the sustainability of independent power producers going forward. To achieve this, a long-term solution to ESCOM's debt burden will be finalized, building on the social compact on energy security recently agreed to by social partners. Through these measures, we aim to achieve sufficient, secure, and reliable energy supply within 2 years. Our third key intervention is an employment stimulus to create jobs and to support the livelihoods of our people. Large-scale job interventions driven by the state and social partners have proven effective in many countries that have faced devastation from wars and other crises. We have committed 100 billion rand over the next 3 years to create jobs through public and social employment as the labor market recovers. This starts now with over 800,000 employment opportunities created in the months ahead. The employment stimulus is focused on those interventions that can be rolled out most quickly and have the greatest impact on economic recovery. At the heart of the employment stimulus is a new, innovative approach to public employment which harnesses the energies as well as the capabilities of the wider society. It uses the considerable creativity as well as the initiative and institutional resources that exist in our society to respond to local community priorities. These activities will be locally driven, allowing participants to earn an income while contributing to the prospects of their community. Traditional forms of public employment are being scaled up and new forms of public employment created to meet the immediate need right now. We are going to expand our natural resource management programs such as Working on Fire and Working for Water. We are going to create 300,000 opportunities for young people to be engaged as education and school assistants at schools throughout the country, to help teachers with basic routine work so that more time is spent on teaching and enabling learners to catch up from the time lost because of COVID. This is a great opportunity for young people. And having met a number of young people, this is something that they're looking forward to. More than 60,000 jobs will be created for labor-intensive maintenance and construction of municipal infrastructure, as well as rural roads. To support our healthcare system, and an additional 6,000 community health workers and nursing assistants will be deployed as we proceed with the implementation of the National Health Insurance. Public employment will be expanded at the provincial and city level, contributing to cleaner, greener, and safer public spaces and improved maintenance of our country's facilities. In all of these programs, we will ensure that recruitment is fair, recruitment is open and transparent, and that opportunities are advertised widely. To assist young people who are unemployed to access these and other opportunities, we will launch the National Pathway Management Network as a platform for recruitment and other forms of support. Finally, the employment stimulus includes direct support for livelihoods and the protection of jobs in vulnerable sectors. Support is being provided to more than 100,000 early childhood development practitioners and to 75,000 small-scale farmers whose production was disrupted by the pandemic. Grant-making programs are being expanded in the creative, cultural, and sports sector, and funding has been allocated to protect jobs in cultural institutions such as museums and theaters. More than 40,000 vulnerable teaching posts are being secured in schools which have lost income from fees. The implementation of the employment stimulus has already commenced. Each of these work opportunities is fully funded and ready for implementation. The speed and urgency with which we are expanding employment programs demonstrates our commitment to support those who are without work at this point in time. As these and other recovery measures are being rolled out, we need to do everything in our means to provide support to those in society who continue to face hunger and also continue to face great distress. We will therefore be extending the special COVID-19 grant by a further 3 months so that we assist our people who are in distress. We had announced that this special COVID grant will come to an end after 6 months, but having received a lot of representations from the organizations that represent our people across the board, and also having realized that pending the full implementation of these measures that we are announcing, there will be a gap of some 3 months where we need to give support to our people to continue the support that was given 6 months ago to make it 9 months. The stretched nature of our financial resources does make it difficult and impossible to extend it beyond the further 3 months. The challenges that are being faced by our country from a fiscal point of view dictate that we should only be able to do it for the next 3 months. We know that there are discussions that are going on in our country about a basic income grant, and we say those discussions should continue, but we do need to rebuild our economy. We do need to reposition our economy so that it can be stronger. And in the near future, we should be able to engage in discussions about measures such as basic income grant. What we are doing now will maintain a temporary expansion of social protection and allow the labor market sufficient time to recover. Our fourth key intervention is a drive for industrial growth. This is the context of a steady decline of a manufacturing base over many years. To place our economy on a new trajectory, we are going to support a massive growth in local production and make South African exports much more competitive. We will build on the work that was being done in several areas before the pandemic struck. Through the first 2 South African investment conferences, we managed to secure pledges of around 664 billion rand in new investment. To date, just over 170 billion rand of capital expenditure committed during those investment conferences has been invested in projects for construction and buying equipment that is essential to mining, manufacturing, telecommunications, and agriculture. Last year, South Africa recorded its first trade surplus with the European Union, driven by record exports of manufactured goods. Our country produced and exported more motor vehicles last year than in any previous year, and that records great progress about the capability of our manufacturing base. Our agricultural sector has continued to grow with a bumper maize harvest and the expansion of many high-valued crops. We have positioned South Africa as one of the most attractive destinations in the world for global business services. Despite the weaknesses in our economy, despite the devastation that has been caused by the coronavirus, these are some of the strengths on which we can build and strengthen the economy of our country. There are huge opportunities that we can seize through effective partnerships, targeted deployment of resources, and the right policies and active implementation of our plans. South Africa currently imports around 1.1 trillion rand of goods, excluding oil, every year. If we were to manufacture just 10% of those goods locally, it is estimated that we can add 2 percentage points to our annual GDP. The rest of Africa currently imports 2.9 trillion rand worth of manufactured goods from outside the continent every year. If South Africa were to supply just 2% of those goods that the rest of the continent imports, it could add 1.2 percentage points to our annual GDP. So these are the opportunities that lie out there for us to grab. And if we succeed in reaching our target of 1.2 trillion rand in new investment by 2023, it could add around 2.5% to our annual GDP. It is to realize this huge potential that the social partners have agreed to prioritize a range of consumer and industrial products for local procurement. During the course of our deliberations and discussions, all the 4 components of our social partners realize that herein lies a great opportunity for our economy. Together with business and labor, we will soon be publishing localization targets for goods in areas such as agro-processing, healthcare, basic consumer goods, industrial equipment, construction materials, and transport rolling stock. We will enforce government policies to ensure that all public infrastructure projects use locally made materials, including steel products, cement, bricks, and other components. We will support the efforts by organized business. We are planning to establish supplier development programs for large companies and in key sectors. And we welcome the commitment of our unions to ensure their investment companies increasingly invest in companies that buy from local manufacturers. The NADLEC agreement commits all companies and government entities to publicly disclose in their annual reports the value of procurement from local producers and on the steps taken to improve localization. Now, the social partners at NADLEC have also agreed to support a massive buy local campaign for this festive season, with a particular call to support women-owned enterprises, small businesses, and township enterprises as well. And we call on every South African to contribute to our recovery effort by choosing to buy locally made goods and to support local businesses. Yes, government will definitely do the same. This is one way that each and every one of us can contribute to building, to restructuring our economy, to restoring it, to rebuilding it, but also to get us to get into the mode of a new economy. Many countries that have seen exponential growth have relied on locally made goods, because locally made goods is not only lekker, it is also about creating jobs in our own countries. A vital part of growing our industrialization efforts are the sectoral master plans, which bring all partners together to agree on specific measures to improve productivity, investment, and competitiveness. There are currently a number of master plans that are in place in the automotive sector, in the clothing and textile sector, in poultry and sugar. We are now working to finalize master plans in the digital economy, in forestry, in agriculture, agro-processing, the creative industries, in aerospace and defense, in renewable energy, steel and metal fabrication, as well as in furniture. We did say that one of the ways that we want to, restructure our economy and to grow our economy is to focus on the various sectors of our economy, so that we no longer just talk about the economy in generalities. We must be focused, and we must be able to ensure that all the key players in every sector of the economy are able to sit and collaborate over the growth plans of those sectors. And we've already seen good results with various sectors like the automotive sector, the textile and clothing sector, poultry and sugar as well. A central pillar of this work is the transformation of our economy, creating space for new black and women entrants, and take deliberate steps to change ownership and productive patterns. In promoting localization and industrialization, we will be focusing in particular on the development of small, medium, and micro enterprises, including cooperatives. This will take place alongside the development of rural and township economies. There are between 2.4 million and 3.5 million SMMEs in our country, with the largest number in the informal and micro sectors. They offer the greatest untapped potential for growth, employment, and fundamental economic transformation. Through a focused support program, we will support small businesses' participation in the manufacturing value chain. This will include targeting specific products for manufacture by SMMEs for both and domestic market and for exports. It will also include the provision of business infrastructure support, financial assistance through loans and blended funding, facilitating routes to market, and assistance with technical skills, product certification, testing, and quality assurance. Economic growth cannot be realized without the inclusion and the active participation of women. Among the other measures we have outlined, we will be working with women-empowered companies to progressively reach our target of directing at least 40% procurement spend on such enterprises. This is a great opportunity that we are opening for women-led and owned businesses. This is also a vital part of our program to end gender-based violence and femicide, which is fueled by gender inequality, particularly economic disparities between men and women and gender non-conforming persons. In addition to these priority interventions, we will create enabling conditions for a competitive, inclusive, and fast-growing economy. We are fast-tracking reforms to reduce the cost of doing business and lower barriers to entry. The current timeframes for mining, prospecting, water, and environmental licenses must and will be reduced by at least 50% to facilitate new investment. The Petroleum Resources Development Bill will be finalized to unlock our country's enormous untapped potential in upstream oil and gas reserves. Although international tourist travel is likely only to recover in the medium term, our efforts are now focused on implementing an efficient e-visa system and extending visa waivers to new tourism markets. To support tourism over this peak season that is coming, we will shortly be publishing an expanded list of countries from where resumption of international travel will be permitted, which will be supported by targeted marketing in partnership with the private sector. Now, we urge all South Africans to continue to explore their own country in support of the tourism recovery process as one of the hard-hit sectors by COVID-19. We will shortly publish the revised list of critical skills and occupations in high demand and priority occupations to enable highly skilled individuals to be speedily recruited and expedite the issuing of special skills visas to support local firms. We are promoting greater private sector participation in rail, including through granting third-party access to the core rail network and the revitalization of branch lines. We will establish a single economic regulator in transport as a matter of urgency to promote competition as well as efficiency. Work is now underway to improve the efficiency and capacity of our ports in Durban, in East London, in Ngqura, as well as in Cape Town. The release of high-frequency spectrum by March 2021 and the completion of digital migration will, in the end, reduce data costs for firms as well as for households and individuals. This process is being managed, as we know, by ICASA and will promote transformation. It will also reduce costs and increase access. We are developing innovative new ways to provide low-income households with access to affordable high-speed internet through connection subsidies for broadband and support for public Wi-Fi hotspots. Decisive action against crime and corruption is essential for inclusive growth. Criminal elements in our country have taken to the illegal occupation of construction sites and soliciting protection money from businesses. Now, this will come to an end, because It is impeding economic growth. Now, to combat these practices, a joint rapid response team at the national and provincial level will respond to the problem of violent disruptions and construction sites and other business activities. A well-functioning revenue service is central to our economic recovery program. The turnaround at SARS has begun in earnest, and the significant areas of tax evasion and tax fraud have already been identified. SARS is rebuilding its capacity to reverse the decline, to improve compliance, and to recover lost tax revenue. We are working to clamp down on the illegal economy and illicit financial flows, including transfer pricing abuse, profit shifting, VAT and customs duty fraud, under-invoicing of manufactured imports, corruption and other illegal schemes. The decisive action we have taken to prevent, to detect and act against COVID-related corruption will strengthen the broader fight against crime. The Special Investigation Unit has made significant progress in probing allegations of criminal conduct in all public entities during the national state of disaster. The work of the SIU continues, and it will also continue here if you wish in Parliament, and the outcomes of the investigations will be made public once all the due processes have been completed. Law enforcement agencies are being strengthened, and they are also being provided with adequate resources to enable the identification and swift prosecution of corruption and fraud. We wish to assure all South Africans, I would like to assure all South Africans, if there ever was doubt, that there will be no political interference. Repeat, there will be no political interference with the work of our law enforcement agencies. I will make sure that there is none, because it is only when there is no political interference that we are able to observe the rule of law and strengthen all our agencies in the criminal justice system. We will continue to strengthen the framework to ensure that political office bearers at all spheres of government do not do business with the state, and we welcome the agreement at NEDLAC that all social partners will act decisively against corruption and fraud in their own ranks. Now, this is an issue which came up quite strongly at the NEDLAC level, and it was most heartening to hear all the partners at NEDLAC underscoring precisely this point. The public procurement bill will be fast-tracked and transversal contracts put in place for large volume items. We will soon finalize and begin the implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which will improve transparency, which will also improve monitoring and accountability in government across society. Through these actions, we will ensure that every rand of public expenditure is spent productively to benefit our people and to support our recovery effort. Have faith that we have now turned the corner and that things are going to be done differently. All of these actions will be taken within a supportive macroeconomic framework which balances the need to restore fiscal sustainability with economic growth. A critical pillar of this plan is the fiscal framework that will be outlined by the Minister of Finance when he delivers the medium-term budget policy statement in 2 weeks or so. Among other things, this framework will provide a path of fiscal consolidation. It will also speak to our efforts for debt reduction and reprioritization that is supportive of growth and recovery. We cannot sustain the current levels of debt, particularly as increasing borrowing costs are diverting resources that should be utilized for economic and social development. That is why we are urgently implementing the economic reforms that we have agreed with our social partners at NEDLAC to unlock investment, stimulate economic activity, and generate revenue for the fiscus. In reducing government expenditure, we are ensuring that funds that are reprioritized towards poverty alleviation, infrastructure investment, support for economic development and fighting crime and corruption are there to do precisely that. We are also reducing the reliance of SOEs on the fiscus by intensifying efforts to stabilize strategic companies, accelerating the rationalization of SOEs, and where appropriate, identifying strategic equity partners for some of our SOEs. And I envision a stage where, like what other countries have done, like China, as well as Singapore, where some of our well-performing SOEs can even be listed to bring in fresh capital so that they can develop even further. It is clear that implementation is really going to be the key in giving effect to this recovery and reconstruction plan. This requires a much more effective and efficient state with greater coordination and integration between national, provincial, as well as local government. Through the district development model, we are beginning to see progress in the alignment of the work of different spheres. To ensure focused and urgent implementation of the plan, dedicated capacity is being created in the presidency to drive progress and support departments and agencies in the implementation of their mandates. To fast-track the delivery of economic reforms, Operation Vulindlela will be implemented as a joint initiative of the Presidency and the National Treasury, reporting directly to the President on a regular basis. It will work closely with the Cabinet's economic cluster to ensure that the priority interventions and key enabling reforms are implemented rapidly and continuously, as well as effectively, and that those responsible for their implementation will be held accountable. A National Economic Recovery Council comprising of relevant members of cabinet will provide political oversight and enable rapid decision-making. As we now continue to manage the coronavirus down, a National Council for Economic Recovery will now come into its own to enable all the various tasks and interventions that we have identified to be properly implemented. The Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation remains the backbone of government reporting on the 5-year medium-term strategic framework. This will take place alongside the implementation arrangements which have been agreed among the social partners at NEDLAC. We will be releasing the NEDLAC Social Partner Economic Recovery Plan and the Social Compact for Energy Security. These contain very significant measures that we will be working with our social partners on to ensure that we do implement. A presidential working committee chaired by the President will meet regularly to receive reports from each social partner on the extent to which it has implemented its commitments. It will be supported by the Economic Recovery Leadership Team and working groups on particular areas of the recovery plan. In the aftermath of a fire, fellow South Africans, green shoots begin to emerge. The ashes that will have formed and reach the soil, and new life takes root to replace what was lost. Our country is emerging from one of the most difficult periods in living memory. South Africans have suffered and have made great sacrifices, sharing in their hardship with people all over the world. But as South Africans, we have a deep reservoir of resilience that we can draw upon. We have endured much during this period and have always emerged stronger and much more united. We stand together at a crucial time in the history of our country. This is necessary that we should stand together. Our ability to reignite our economy rests on the decisions that we take in this moment and the urgency with which we address this crisis. We should not wish to rest until we have fulfilled the potential of our country. We shall not rest until we have built this economy that we all yearn for, an economy that is based on fairness, justice, inclusive growth, and equality. This is the task of our generation, to renew, to rebuild, and to repair. We dare not take a moment to pause, and together we have it within us to build this economy. The time is now. Ke ona nako. Let us go and do our work. Thank you very much.
This is the time.
That, honorable members, concludes the business of the day, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank the President for availing himself to deliver a speech on the Reconstruction and Economic Recovery Plan. The House is now adjourned.
Long live the President! Long live! Long live the President!
And there you have it then, the Reconstruction and Economic Recovery Plan touted then by President Cyril Ramaphosa, delivered then in Parliament then in that virtual seating, as you can tell there out in Parliament in Cape Town. We're going to dissect it for you. A whole host of different parts of it have certainly come to the fore. Just very quickly, maybe we can see exactly what the market has actually thought of what has actually come through with regards to this as well then, and hopefully we can just check in. As you can see, a whole lot of red actually across the board. The JSE itself has actually gone into quite a tailspin there, so some negativity. And let's remember that what the President has actually put forward is a plan to actually spend a little bit more money. He put 4 priority areas, and we'll unpack those for you in just a moment or two as well. So some of the commodities have gone down, but really the JSE being the big question mark there, that's gone down for the most part on that front. Onto the currencies then, the local currency has actually weakened more than 1% at present. If you can just see on the top left-hand part of your screen there, it's now sitting at 16 Rand and 69 cents, having actually closed yesterday at 16 Rand and 52 cents. So it's lost 17 cents thus far in current trade. Let's actually see what the picture has looked like since the start of the president's speech. So we'll go on to the next graph then with regards to this one. And really, with taking a look at how the speech has started then, and just the movements that we've sort of seen, it really has trended towards that sense of negativity then as well. And that's what you're seeing with regards to that last little bit of those changes up on that front there. So 16 Rand 69 odd, having started, as I said, then around 16 Rand 50 odd against the US dollar. So it kind of tells you then, having started just there, look at how far we've sort of moved across. More than 1% lost then when it comes to South Africa's currency against particularly the US dollar. We're going to unpack exactly for you some of those salient points. As I said, there are 4 big salient points that they wanted to focus on when it comes to the president's speech there, really around industrial growth, the jobs market in itself as well, and we'll get to all of those. Of course, we do have some reaction as well for you coming through from Cape Town. So we're going to cross all across and try to get a sense of exactly where things are going at present. So as you can tell just behind us, we're going to get some of those comments as well quite ready then for you. Of course, the conversation with Nedlac, this was where this greeting was actually really put forward. For now, though, let's very quickly just head on to Parliament and kind of get a sense of how exactly the reaction has been to the president's speech.
Urhulumente mazingaxhomekeki kwimali yabarhafi. Nina niyibona into eyokwenzeka okanye sizithembiso njengaphambili?
Hayi, intsomi kamlengana ubekuhleli phaa ecam kweziko kuba ethethwa kwangumsholozi kudala wangena naye sithi ayizukwenzeka loo nto, wangena no-Minister of Finance oMalusi Gigaba bedeketa bethetha into enye. Ayikazukwenzeka isikhokelo singekatshintshi kwezi nkampani zikarhulumente kuqala noqiniseka ukuthi iingxaki ze-governance ziya-addresswa. For as long as those problems are there, angekho ukwazi ukuthi bangamane besithi gqolo befuna imali kurhulumente. Ingxaki inye yinto yokuba urhulumente uthe ufuna ukwakha an efficient state, uzawuyakha njani ke that efficient state if you don't have these entities ezakwazi uncedisa with this development program?
I'm just waiting for them to connect me and then I will come to you. Cool. I'll appreciate your patience.
Then we're going to try and get a little bit more reaction there. Justin Khosa there, of course, getting a little bit more word really with regards to the words then said, the IFP really believing that in many instances then that perhaps that speech was much the same as what was said even in the days of Jacob Zuma. So nothing has really changed thus far. It keeps on putting forward similar and the same words then as well. So just where to from here? Has it actually done enough? Has it created the kind of stimulus that we're actually looking for as a country? As I made note of Nedlac there being a key and critical part of the conversation then that was brought forward by the president. Now also page 14, the president does speak then about reducing government expenditure, and in so doing, this is how they plan to do that. They're going to ensure that funds are reprioritized towards poverty alleviation, as well as infrastructure investment, support for economic development, and fighting crime and corruption. Of course, that was the ticket that President Cyril Ramaphosa campaigned on to even be the president of the ANC, much less the country as well. Another note that he made there was we are also reducing the reliance of state-owned enterprises, a key element here, on the fiscus by intensifying efforts to stabilize strategic companies, accelerating the rationalization of SOEs, and where appropriate, now this is important then, identifying strategic partners. Has that not been a sentiment we've been sharing for at least the last 2, 3, if not 4 years, if not even longer than that? As a matter of fact, we've just wanted somebody else to get involved in them. Perhaps being an administrator and not just necessarily the ones owning these companies may serve government in some good stead as well. Let's head on back to Cape Town then. My colleague Bulelani Philip is on the steps of Parliament, set to give us a little bit more reaction then, and this political reaction then to the President's address for that reconstructive and economic plan. Bulelani, across and over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Arabile, and welcome to outside the steps of the National Assembly. Of course, the President announcing his economic restructuring and recovery plan. One of the issues that is emphasized that this is one of the most difficult periods that we've experienced in the recent history, and of course, it's affected an already bettered economy. Now, of course, there is a lot of political interest in terms of the announcements that have been made by the President. Of course, there is no dispute that a lot of the issues that were raised by the President are not new. In fact, they were announced in his February State of the Nation address. But of course, now we're going to take some political reaction. And first up, we bring in Mr. Wayne Thringe from the ACDP. Mr. Thringe, a lot of issues here were raised in the State of the Nation address in February. Do you think there is enough, implementation going forward? Of course, and the test is going to be an outcomes-based plan. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think certainly there has not been implementation in terms of, or sufficient implementation in terms of what was stated at SONA. I think many political parties, including the African Christian Democratic Party, have been critical about the implementation of the policies that government has. The ACDP is on record, for example, about speaking about one of the government policies of beneficiation. Beneficiation is a policy that it has the potential to create millions of jobs. But the government has actually failed in implementing its own policies. So certainly from SONA to date, we have not seen the implementation of some good policies that government itself has. This is largely as a result of corruption. It is largely as a result of an inept government, largely as a result of the challenges of a government that is not as efficient as it ought to be. And so as the ACDP, we have been very vocal in terms of the fact that we do need to see beneficiation taking place. We do need to see localization taking place. We do need to see our young people in particular being upskilled. In addition, I think the government has also failed with regards to, we've had one of the hardest lockdowns of the world, in the world. As a result of this, we've seen another 2.2 million people actually losing their jobs. Now, another 800,000 jobs is what the President has actually spoken about. That pales in comparison to the 2.2 million that have been added to the 10 to 12 million people who are unemployed in South Africa.
Is it a feasible target, that target set by the President?
We've had these particular targets by the President and by previous presidents in the ruling party in the past. None of them have actually been achieved. And so I think that it is yet to be seen. Obviously, we are cautiously optimistic just because of the sincere or the tremendous challenges that are actually faced out there by people who are unemployed. We are optimistic that jobs will be created. However, we actually need to see implementation, and the ACDP will be continued to champion for those who actually do not have jobs in the future.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Wayne Thringe. He is, of course, the finance spokesperson from the ACDP. I'm going to bring in more political reaction now. We're bringing in the leader of the FF Plus, Dr. Peter Groenewald. Of course, the biggest theme here is around job creation and also, reigniting the economy. Has the president gone far enough in his plan, or is it more of the same?
No. I'm very disappointed with what I heard this afternoon from the President. He didn't say anything new. I mean, we've heard before. How many times about infrastructure development? How many times did you hear about the renewable energy that's going to take place? He has announced a new name for the stimulus or the employment stimulus package this afternoon. It is actually an extension and an expansion of social grants. That does not create really jobs. It's actually using the WPC program to give people more jobs, but it's not really permanent jobs. It is quite clear, as far as the Freedom Front Plus is concerned, that the President is a prisoner of Netlac on the one side, and also a prisoner of the social economic ideology of the ANC. He cannot create the jobs he needs. He's going to create 800,000 jobs. What about the 2.2 million jobs at this moment we know about that has been lost? And it's going to be more when we get the new reports for the new quarters of the term. So we say that we would have wanted to hear specifics in his announcements, like for instance, that there should be amendments to the labor laws in South Africa to make it easy for investors to come in invest in South Africa. For instance, doing away with black economic empowerment. There should be free economic zones created where businesses can come and do business, but where there's reduced taxes for those businesses so that they can create jobs. That type of announcements were actually what we wanted to hear from the Freedom Front Plus this afternoon.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Peter Groenewald, the leader of the FF Plus. And of course, we're going to continue taking more reaction, Arabile, here on the steps of Parliament. Mr. Lulama Nchaisa is from the African Movement. Of course, I mean, one of the issues that you've always highlighted is the issue of corruption and how it steals money from the state, and also how that money could have been used to uplift the poor. He's emphasized that corruption is on top of his agenda. Is he on the right track? Or do you believe that he's doing more of the same?
Yes, Bulelani, it's good news, it's a good plan. And without stepping out corruption now, we can't make it, you cannot succeed. So the president has made it clear that he's going to focus on corruption, that corruption is done away with. But we are looking forward now to that because we are not very sure. It's not very easy now to deal with corruption in this country. People have become so corrupt that they cannot be controlled. But I was happy now when he was mentioning that the SIU should be given time now to do its job, and there should be no political interference. So if a person now has been found to be guilty or corrupt, so that person should be dealt with. So that's good news. But we're just looking forward now that how this is going to be implemented, because there have been so many of these plans that have never been implemented. Then this one, we are just waiting and see how is it going to be implemented. But the president himself now is just asking for people now to come together and do this together.
Is the target on job creation feasible for you? 800,000 jobs in the medium term, is it feasible?
I don't think that is feasible, really. So it can't be. So it's impossible, really, because there are no jobs and companies have suffered. And when he's saying that they're going to assist the companies now to create jobs, that cannot be successful. So it's not possible at all. But now we have got to try as a country.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Lulama Nchaisa from the AIC, of course. Now, bringing into the conversation is the UDM Chief Whip, Mr. Ngabayomzi Kwankwa, who's also the spokesperson for the party here in Parliament on finance issues. Mr. Kwankwa, of course, the issue of economic growth, the president putting a target of around 3% economic growth by 2030. Is that a feasible target, or is it pie in the sky?
No, it's pie in the sky. Look, is the president of the country. He has to be optimistic, especially when it comes to targets that he sets for his government. Obviously, whatever targets he puts in place for his government have to have enough stretch and pull so that he can be able to challenge his ministers, challenge his administration to work towards that objective. But the reality of the matter is that unless something drastic changes in the country, we are unlikely to achieve that target. It's very unrealistic. We are even struggling to reach 1%, and the economy has actually contracted in the last quarter and is going to contract for the rest of the year into the foreseeable future. It's unlikely that we can achieve 3%.
Do you support this plan?
Well, the plan, there's nothing new really in the plan. In all honesty, there's nothing new. It's the same wish list that we've had in the past from President Zuma, President Thabo Mbeki, and to some extent President Mandela. And the taste of the pudding, as we always say, will be in the eating. It's about the implementation of the plan. Look, it's not like South Africans don't know what's wrong with the economy. It's not like the ANC government does not know what's wrong with the economy. The diagnosis is fine. We know what the challenges are. And probably we might differ here and there about what needs to be done, but we're clear about the direction we need to take. What is required now is leadership on the part of government to ensure that whatever plans we put in place, we implement them and set our eyes towards the targets that we've set for ourselves. You can't set 800,000, you know it's not going to be achieved. But in the past, you have a reputation of not achieving any target. There's no accountability if line ministers don't achieve targets.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Ngabayomzi Kwankwa is the UDM Chief Whip here in Parliament. For now, we're going to leave it there, Arabile, and we will come back to you in a bit with more political reactions here on the steps of Parliament. Back to you in studio.
Bulelani Philip out there in Parliament. Thank you so much for those reactions there as well, my colleague there gathering. Just a little bit more political reaction with regards to that address by the President. My big question also still becomes, though, we've had the RDP plan, which of course was started however long ago now, just after we retained and got freedom with regards to our reconciliation here in South Africa. And we're still speaking about development and housing and the reconstruction thereof this many years later. That sentiment has still come to the fore. Well, some things never change indeed. Martin Kingston, though, joins us now as we get to perhaps unpack a little bit more of this on the business side of things. Martin, perhaps let's try and get your reaction to the President's address there as well. Did it offer you anything of substance? I mean, the four main critical points are nothing we haven't heard before.
No, well, we welcome it, Arabile. We've obviously been involved, as the President said, intimately in the engagements with government, with Labour, and indeed with civil society over the past several months. All of the interventions we agreed to. The question is whether we can afford them, whether they're implementable in an urgent time frame. Obviously, the economy has been devastated not only by COVID-19, but was already threatened by the downgrade. We were in a recession before COVID-19 arrived. And we have no time to lose. Urgency, as he stressed at the end of his speech, is the order of the day. And we're going to have to mobilize resources from across all social partners, business in particular, experience and skills, as well as capital, for viable, credible opportunities, large and small, if we're going to be able to pivot the country onto the inclusive growth trajectory that he was talking about.
Yeah, in doing so then, he speaks about the employment stimulus that he's trying to touch as well. 800,000 employment opportunities to be created in the months ahead, something that is supposedly already been done before. Have we seen the fruits of any of that 100 billion rand over 3 years that he said would have already been put in place to create jobs?
Well, we need to be very careful about managing expectations under the circumstances. We've lost 2.2 million jobs, we know, in the formal and informal sectors in the first 6 months of this year alone. We don't know what the ramifications are going to be for the third and fourth quarters of this year. We know that COVID-19, as the President said, is going to be with us not only for the balance of this year, but indeed for the foreseeable short and maybe even the medium term. And we're going to have to live within those circumstances and adjust our working practices accordingly. And in those circumstances, it's very difficult to create sustainable jobs unless we do so in a manner that is coupled with fundamental structural reform. We're thrilled that he has given the emphasis that he has to those structural reforms. We have long, as a business, been saying that this is absolutely essential if we're going to be able to bolster the levels of confidence that are needed for investment, because, of course, growth follows investment. And jobs follows growth. That's the only way that it's going to happen. And we think that the private sector, large and small, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, as he said, is a key driver to that economic level of sustained activity.
Yeah. Martin, the President then highlighted, he wants to go on a big industrial growth drive, if you want to call it that. We make more than 170 billion rand in capex from the investment forums that was invested in a few projects. But one of the things that I thought was quite significant was we import 1.1 trillion rand worth of goods. And if 10% of those were manufactured in South Africa, it could add 2 percentage points to GDP. If we know that, why have we not done it yet?
Because I think we've not been organized and integrated as a country within the private sector, between the private sector and the public sector. We've demonstrated, actually, most recently in the context of PPE, that when we work collectively, in that case, business, government, and indeed Labour, we're able to pivot into localization of manufacturing of PPE, when at the beginning of the pandemic, we were actually importing all the PPE that we thought we required. The same thing can be applied across swathes of the economy, and we've committed as part of the action plan to identifying those areas where we can indeed localize and industrialize, but it needs to be on a viable basis. We need to scale it appropriately, not only for domestic consumption, but also for export, particularly into the rest of the continent.
Yeah. Did he put and apply enough pressure on the SOEs, do you think? I mean, he speaks about the continued split up of Eskom as something they're continuing to do. At the same time, they're trying to secure energy as well for the next 2 years. Did that give enough impetus to trying to build and ensure that there is enough power supply to grow this economy?
Well, we think he indented appropriately on SOEs, on Eskom, and on the energy sector. That's clearly at the forefront of everybody's minds. We need to have reliable, predictable, and indeed affordable energy from all sources, particularly recognizing that we're moving into the just transition and away from carbon-heavy consumption into a much more appropriate form of energy generation and consumption. And that is obviously the order of the day. I suspect it's going to take much longer than we would like to be able to give effect to the restructuring of Eskom and indeed the energy sector. But we have signed, as you know, we've committed to a social compact for Eskom, ADNEDLAC, all of the partners concerned. We now need to put that into practice. This is all, of course, about implementation. With respect to the other SOEs, we think there's much more that needs to be done and could be said. We have consistently maintained that those SOEs that are not systemically important need to be migrated responsibly off the state balance sheet. He talked a little bit about that when he talked about even listing some of them. And those that need to be retained and need to be appropriately capitalized and given the requisite skills, capabilities in terms of management, board, and indeed an appropriate fit-for-purpose strategy to support the economic recovery.
Martin Kingston, appreciate the time. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon as well, getting your reaction then and Business South Africa's reaction then with regards to the President's Reconstruction and Economic Plan. Let's head on over back to Parliament now. Bulelani Phillips also standing by still with a little bit more when it comes to the political reaction. Bulelani.
Well, thanks again, Arabile. Welcome back here on the steps of the National Assembly. Of course, we're taking more political reactions from the different political parties. I'm going to bring into this conversation the spokesperson on finance within the IFP, Inkosi Butelezi. A lot of talking points in this recovery plan of the president. Of course, issues that have been emphasized include the issue of the rollout of spectrum, the issue of energy security, as well as the issue of reindustrialization. All these issues have been raised in the State of the Nation address. Will you take out anything from these plans going forward?
As they say that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We are yet to see all these plans actually being implemented because, as we said earlier on, that South Africa is not in this state because of lack of ideas and plans, but because we don't implement whatever that we put forth to take us forward. We were happy that the President actually did cover a number of things, the issue of infrastructure, which is very good, but didn't speak much of actually another infrastructure is very important to the SOEs, except on what is relating to Transnet. But in terms of SAA, we know that is very important infrastructure in terms of boosting our economy. There's nothing much that was said to that effect. But all in all, he did speak about a number of things, and we only hope that all his plans will be actually actioned.
Now, talking about some of the targets that is set around the issues of job creation, 800,000 jobs in the medium term, do you think those are feasible?
It's good to stretch yourself, to have ambitious dreams, because they determine how much you must try to stretch yourself. But we believe that those targets can be met if we've got committed people. The inefficiencies within the system is actually addressed, because if that is not addressed, we won't actually get anywhere closer to that. Because one of our biggest challenges is that we have what it means, what it takes rather, but there are inefficiencies in the system which retard any progress.
Now, lastly, before I let you go, of course, one of the issues that is talked about is around making sure that he makes it easier for businesses to invest in South Africa. What advice would you give him in terms of making it easier for businesses to come and invest in South Africa, as well as locally to actually, remove the red tape in terms of starting small businesses?
You can remove the red tapes, which is good, but what we actually ask the president to do, which is the very important thing, is to deal with the issue of corruption, because that is one factor that is actually repelling investors away from South Africa.
All right. Thank you so much, Inkosi Mzamo Butelezi. He's the spokesperson on finance within the IFP, one of the political parties represented here within the National Assembly. For now, Arabile, I'm going to take it back to you. I will cross back in a moment.
Thank you so much for that, Bulelani Philip. They're out in the steps of Parliament then, having kept things going for us then, getting some political reaction. Let's continue to perhaps get the union's reactions now. SAFTU General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi does join us now via video link at this time. Zwelinzima, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. Perhaps your reaction to this. I mean, the president touted the unions having to continue to speak to their delegation and their members as well. Did you get a sense that this is a plan that would be helpful in any way?
Firstly, when he talks about NEDLEG, he talks about NEDLEG to the exclusion of the second biggest federation in this country, which is the home of the manufacturing unions. And therefore, he makes a mistake that when he cuts a deal with the public sector unions at NEDLEG, that will automatically apply to the workers that are not represented at NEDLEG. We continue to insist, you cannot shave our heads in our absence. So this is just a complete waste of time. It's not going to be done. We're not going to give something our thumbs up that we have not been involved in its shaping. Worst of all, which is the second point, what was presented today is not a reconstruction, is not a start afresh and learning from the mistakes that have been committed in the past, is not a new beginning. It's not a recognition that we've wasted our time, our precious time, 26 years into trying to implement neoliberalism that favors the poor, that favors the rich, to the exclusion of the poorest, and that have made South Africa a country of two worlds, as was designed by colonialism and by the apartheid system. South Africa has become only synonymous with one thing. The rich have become more rich, and the poor has become even much more poorer. The statement that was made today is not a strategy to reverse that unfortunate trend in the economy. So we were correct when we were saying that we will be disappointed. Indeed, we are disappointed, and we are absolutely certain that this strategy as presented will not resolve the country's number one crisis, which is unemployment.
Very quickly, just as a last question then. So one, I can confirm then that you're saying then as SAFTU, you do not then support the plan that was put forward by President Cyril Ramaphosa at this point in time. And just very finally then, number two is to say, as a union then, you're effectively going to find other ways to try and help your own members outside of the plan put forward.
The only way that we can do is to repeat what we have said right throughout our lives. The struggle continues. Power concedes nothing without the struggle.
Zwelinzima Vavi, the leader there of SAFTU, joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it there as we continue to get more reaction then to the President's address there for the Reconstruction and Economic Recovery Plan for South Africa post-COVID-19. Let's head back to Cape Town. Bulelani Philip still on the steps of the National Assembly there, getting some reaction as well then to some of the political remarks coming through. Bulelani, I'll hand back over to you.
Other countries, for example, in other parts of Africa that did not...
Well, thank you so much, Arabile. As we wrap up all the political reactions here in Parliament, I'm going to take into this conversation the DA, the biggest official opposition party here in Parliament. Jordan Hill-Lewis is the spokesperson of the DA on finance issues. Jordan, around the issues of assurances around investment, cost of doing business, are you guys satisfied that this will appease international investors as well as local investors?
There's only one thing that will appease local and international investors and get our economy growing, and that is actual progress on the promises that we heard today. Implementation is all that counts now. We cannot afford to go another year, another 2 years listening to these promises but making zero progress and action on actually implementing them. And that's what's going to count. That's what everyone is looking for. So
That said, your support for this COVID-19 stress grant to be extended for another 3 months?
Not be judged on how nice sounding they were, but they will only be judged on whether he makes progress on implementation.
Around the issues of industrialization, of course, he's touched on this. I have people, of course, as you've said, that the implementation is key. Do you see it translating into reality on the ground?
Well, what I would have liked to have seen is for the president to actually commit to specific timelines. Say this reform will be done by this date, and if it isn't done, this is the key part, there will be consequences for those responsible. Ministers who stand in the way of reform will be
Thank you very much.
Same for senior public officials and so on. Without those commitments to really make it happen, I'm afraid people will be very skeptical about what was said today. Because we've heard it before. We've heard it for 3 years now under Ramaphosa's presidency. So we've got to see some tough action. And the only way that he can show that is in the coming weeks and months. Is he going to stick by what he said and take action against those who stand in the way or not?
Lastly, before I let you go, the big word is using structural reforms. Something has been saying over and over again. This time around, are you convinced that it will take us to the promised land?
Well, let me say our economic situation is so serious that if it doesn't happen, well, you know, the future is very bleak for our economy. It doesn't give anyone any satisfaction to say that. We are all passionate South Africans. We want our country to succeed. We want people to be in work and lifted out of poverty. But we have got to implement the structural reform agenda that you've just referred to. If we don't, there's no chance of an economic recovery. I'm afraid it is as simple as that. It is a crossroads for our country. And that is why I'm saying it all comes down to whether he puts the words that he spoke today into action in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you so much, Jordan Hill-Lewis, the DA's finance spokesperson, bringing us to an end of this special broadcast outside here in Parliament. Of course, is emphasizing that implementation and timeframes is what they're looking for. Arabile, we'll take a wrap here in Parliament. It's back to you in studio.
Bulelani Philip, thank you so much for that. Then out in Parliament, they're giving us a rundown on some of the political reaction coming through then with regards to President Cyril Ramaphosa's reconstructive and economic plan. Let's bring it back here now to Johannesburg then. We're joined right here in studio by Thandeka Qobulembeki, SABC economic news editor as well, joining us here. Thandeka, thank you so much for the time. Did that offer anything of substance, anything new? Did we get something that would actually reconstruct and recover South Africa's economy?
Well, that remains to be seen, and how vigorously they will pursue the issue of implementation. So there's a certain renewed vigor with which he places emphasis on those 4 or 5 main elements of the economic recovery plan. But unfortunately, I get a sense of old wine in new bottles. And I get a sense that there is still a marriage, a refusal to break out of the prism of old, failed macroeconomic policy frameworks.
Why are we struggling to do that, though? I mean, we've discussed insanity as being, you know, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. We're pretty much doing the same thing here and expecting South Africa to move in a particular direction. And yet, we haven't been for the last 20-odd years.
Characterizing the road to the issuing and the launch of this economic recovery plan has been a major schism and a debate between those who in NEDLEC proposed a macroeconomic framework or a macroeconomic path that is Keynesian, that introduces the idea that we need to stimulate demand in the economy by spending further, and opposing them in NEDLEC and in government, particularly from Treasury, have those who've said we must pursue the route of austerity even in a crisis and maintain the fiscal framework that we already
He's tried to put a little bit of measure of both in here, hasn't he, though? I mean, he said he wants a massive rollout of infrastructure across the country. Then there's the rapid expansion of energy capacity as well, which actually means that you're going to cut how much you have reliance from Eskom and the like as well, actually. Then you want to increase the amount for employment stimulus and then a growth to drive industrial growth in the country. Has he gone now the way of saying, let's perhaps try to spend a little bit more out of this trouble?
Well, it's fancy footwork because while he's conscious of the debt trajectory of our country, he's also very conscious of the dire social needs and the abject poverty and the growing joblessness. So that was fancy footwork, and he is walking a tightrope. And he's also trying to reconcile the different social and economic partners who have gathered in NADLAC. But whether it's a good job and whether it's doable or not remains to be seen. But a lot of it lies in the sense of urgency and in the quality of the implementation to fix those things that we can fix, and then to continue to debate and fight over those things that remain unresolved in the hope that somehow we can find national consensus and a way forward collectively.
One thing he certainly did do towards the end is try to create that sense of urgency for us to actually do this. But our track record on implementation just doesn't stand us in good stead. And I can imagine that the ratings agencies will look at this and say, well, we'll just wait for you to implement it before we actually make a move. Do you get a sense that the political drive, though, now is there? Is there a real sense of urgency, as he spoke about towards the end?
Well, as a citizen, I am optimistic, but as a journalist, I take seriously the obligation to this democracy to hold their feet to the fire on all the commitments that they have made to the South African people today, and to rigorously explore every single angle and aspect of this and hold power to account on the plan on the table, because even if 10% of this plan is implemented, it is moving forward. But I am concerned about this inability to think beyond the current straitjackets ideologically.
Yeah, it definitely gets difficult. And as you said, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the eating is going to be very difficult in a time when coronavirus has certainly put us...
Do you think we've got our work cut out for us?
Look, one thing's for sure is that we're not going to help ourselves move forward by doing the same things we've continuously done, which is almost nothing in my point of view. I think there's going to be a whole lot of hard grafting from here on in if we actually really want to see growth levels in this country. We continue to speak about schools, infrastructure, sanitation, housing, water. My big question, again, I started off with it by asking, what was RDP? The RDP thing about if we're still talking about housing infrastructure. You know, we failed so many years ago already on certain issues. How are we now moving forward from them?
Most encouragingly, he did also speak about, and beyond the social issues, working a way forward for the SOE sector so that the SOEs cease to be a drag on the fiscus. And it's enlightening that he's beginning to speak of the Chinese model that he referred to or alluded to in his speech, where you separate the public mandate side of the SOEs from the commercial side. You allow the commercial side to pursue public listings as a way of raising the liquidity and raising capital for those entities that are then freed up to behave like private companies. And he even seemed to suggest that the future of South African SOEs could be like that of China. And you know that China's SOEs, which are mega SOEs, and many of them industrial SOEs, are in the global top 500 companies. And if we just pursue that trajectory alone, we're on a winning ticket.
Oh, we certainly can hope. And as you said, as a citizen, we do need to remain hopeful at the very least. Thandeka Qubulembeki, SABC News economics editor, then joining us as we unpack just a little bit more when it comes to the president's address there for South Africa's reconstruction and economic plan then. We also do have political economist Matlala Setlagoli rather joining me as well for a little bit more reaction here. Matlala, did you get a sense that this did enough for you? Did that offer sufficient change that we can push forward from here?
Afternoon, Honorable. To be quite honest, there's nothing substantially new in what the president has tabled. I mean, the president has focused on the availability of energy. Look, firstly, there has been a slow pace in terms of facilitating own use generation in terms of energy. If you look in the past 5 years, there's only been 5 licenses issued by the Department of Energy in terms of own use generation. 5 licenses in the past 5 years in terms of own use generation that exceeds 1 megawatt. Already, there's a challenge there. Now we get to the reindustrialization program. When we get to the reindustrialization program that supports localization and exports of South African goods. Firstly, in 2011, there was the the local procurement accord. This was in 2011 where stakeholders actually committed to procuring 75% of their products from local manufacturers. What happened to that? This is nothing necessarily new. And in terms of exports, this will actually take for South African companies to be competitive on a global scale. We look at our SMMEs in the South African context, they're not really the most competitive SMMEs globally. One of the things he speaks about broadband availability, as part of the infrastructure rollout. The president here misses the point that, the broadband strategy has been around since 2012. What has happened to that? The digital migration as well, in terms of broadcasting digital migration, has actually hampered the broadband availability, because once there's this digital migration, in terms of it happens, it will open up avenues for low-cost broadband. But one thing that people have brought up, several of your speakers they have brought up, is implementation. But no one actually touches on the underlying causes of this lack of implementation. The underlying causes of this lack of implementation is quite simple. It's a lack of state capacity. The president actually sidestepped this elephant in the room. He did not make mention of how to improve state capacity in terms of the competencies, bureaucratic competencies within the state. Unless we address this, we're going to have many, many plans that are not implemented. Another aspect is monitoring and evaluation. I had, since Thandeka there, mentioned that, we keep in the same microeconomic framework that has not worked. How sure are we that it has not worked if we have not done any substantive monitoring and evaluation of our policies? This is one of the things that government lacks on. So it's state capacity, and that capacity actually hinders the ability of government to monitor and evaluate the policies that they have put in place. But generally, I feel that this economic recovery plan offers nothing new, and it fails to address the elephant in the room, which is the decline and lack of state capacity.
Yeah, Matlala, you make really such valid points. But I suppose then one could say, though, that we can say that it hasn't worked, because if we haven't been monitoring and evaluating it, we've already failed in that aspect. So that's already a failure in many instances. Do you see a little more political will? I asked Thandeka the same question as well, and I'll pose it to you. The president put out a sense of urgency towards the end there, that it's up to us now. We need to do this. Does that galvanize you at this point? Does that make you feel like the rest of cabinet and government as a whole is actually going to, action all of these?
Look, I'm not as enthusiastic about the implementation. One, as I've indicated, state capacity, right? And you mentioned political will. One of the issues that hampers state capacity is that blurry interface between state and party. Something that the president, has tried to sidestep as well. Yes, he did make mention earlier in the year that, cadre deployment has to be merited. But this interface needs to be managed well, because it encroaches on the capacity of the state. Secondly, we have a high vacancy rate within the public service, whether at municipal level or at provincial or national departments. And one of the issues is that the local government level is the hardest hit level of government in terms of incapacity. This is the interface between people or citizens on the ground and government, the provision of services by government. This is the most important layer of government. We need to fix the incapacities at the level of government if we are to get anything right. Because if you listen very well to the president, he did make mention of infrastructure in rural areas and small towns. In 2012, there was a small town regeneration program. What happened to that? In fact, this small town regeneration program now forms part of SALGA's strategy for 2017 to 2022. These plans have always been there. This small town regeneration program is all about rolling out infrastructure in rural and small towns and actually making them realize their economic potential. Unless the implementation and the capacity challenges are addressed, we will still sing the same song come 5 years from now.
Yep. It's going to get tough unless we actually do the hard graft. Matlala Setlalogile, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it here on SABC News. A really in-depth and succinct look at exactly what the president had put forward there when it comes to that reconstructive and economic growth plan. So much more to unpack, so much more to detail even when it comes to this plan, how exactly it's going to work. Do we have enough to do it? We keep touting, let's spend money on expanding the energy capacity of the country, perhaps increasing the amount of job creations and job opportunities for not just youth, but certainly even for teachers and the like as well, trying to drive industrial growth. How do we do that when we don't even have the money? We'll talk about that after this. Stay tuned.
Our lives are different now, and saving money is more important than it ever was.
Saving money right now is crucial.
Saving is very important, and lockdown has showed us that.
Apart from everything, I just